So, a company the US government tried to kill just outsold Apple in China for the first time in 5 years. Nobody threw a parade about it, which tells you everything about how this story got covered. The company is Huawei, and no, this isn't a phone review. This is about what happens when you try to cut a $2.8 trillion company off from the entire American tech stack, and it turns out the tech stack has a workaround. Let's go back to May 2019, because that's when Washington put Huawei on the entity list. Translation: American companies can't sell Huawei anything anymore. No more Google apps, no more Android updates, no more Qualcomm chips, no more access to the advanced chip factories that run on American equipment, including the ones in Taiwan that Apple happens to use too. For a phone company, that's not a slap on the wrist. That's someone reaching into your chest and taking the engine out. Huawei's global market share was around 17% back then, tied with Samsung for the top spot. Within 2 years, it was under 3%. A phone that can't run Gmail or the Play Store is dead weight outside China, and analysts lined up to say so, more than once. Some of them said it twice, just to be sure. Here's the part that should have been the headline and somehow wasn't. Getting cut off didn't kill Huawei. It gave the company one job: rebuild the entire technology stack from nothing, with 0 American parts, as fast as physically possible. So they did. Let's go layer by layer. The chips first. Huawei's chip design arm, HiSilicon, used to rely on TSMC in Taiwan to actually manufacture the things, and TSMC runs on American tools. So that door closed too. Huawei turned to SMIC instead, a Chinese foundry that Washington has also spent years trying to choke with export controls on advanced equipment. Using older manufacturing tricks, stacked and layered in ways nobody was supposed to bother trying, SMIC and Huawei got chips good enough to run a flagship phone. No American tool anywhere in that specific chain. Is it as good as what TSMC builds for Apple? No, nobody's claiming that. But there's a big difference between worse and doesn't exist, and Huawei solved the second problem, not the first. Then the operating system. No more Android meant Huawei needed a new one overnight, so they built Harmony OS, not a skin, not a fork. 0 lines of Android code, which sounds impressive until you remember an operating system with no apps on it is just an expensive brick. So the real fight was the apps. In 14 months, Huawei went from about 10,000 apps to over 350,000. That's not a growth curve. That's what happens when a government calls every bank, retailer, and developer in the country and tells them to get on the platform. Immediately. Then the cloud. Then all the invisible plumbing, maps, payments, push notifications, the stuff you never think about until it doesn't work. By the end of 2025, every single layer, silicon to app store, was built and run entirely inside China. No American chips, no American code, no American servers. A complete, working, independent phone, sitting in millions of pockets, most of which have no idea any of this happened. Which, again, is the actual story here. Not that Huawei survived, but that almost nobody noticed it did. And in 2025, that independent phone outsold the iPhone in China. Not because it was cheap or junk, because a company Washington spent 6 years trying to erase came back with a supply chain immune to the exact pressure that nearly killed it, wrapped in a national pride pitch that lands hard in a market where buying domestic isn't just a slogan. So why should you care? You've probably never touched a Huawei phone and probably never will. Here's why. China isn't a rounding error for Apple. It's one of Apple's biggest markets outside the US, and for years Apple's whole pitch to Wall Street was that Chinese consumers loved the brand too much to switch. Huawei just showed that loyalty has a ceiling, and when Apple loses ground in the biggest phone market on the planet, that doesn't stay contained over there. It shows up in Apple's margins, in how aggressively Apple needs to compete on price everywhere else. In your iPhone's price tag, eventually, whether you ever think about China or not. Now, before this turns into a Huawei fan video, it isn't one. Huawei's homegrown chips are still a couple of generations behind what TSMC makes for Apple and Qualcomm. Yields on China's domestic chip lines are reportedly worse, meaning more waste per usable chip. And Huawei still can't just walk into the US or most of Europe and sell phones, because the restrictions that force this whole rebuild are, in a lot of places, still very much in effect. So no, Huawei hasn't conquered the world. It's conquered the one market that mattered most to it, and in the process proved something 40 years of American tech policy assumed was impossible. Cut a company off from chips, software, and cloud all at once. And instead of dying, it can just build replacements for all three inside 5 years. That's the part that actually matters here. Chip bans and App Store lockouts only work if there's nowhere else to go. Huawei just built a somewhere else. It's slower. It's more expensive per unit. Right now, it's mostly stuck inside one country's borders. But it exists. 5 years ago, it didn't. If other Chinese companies facing the same restrictions copy this playbook, and there's already evidence they are, the next decade of tech doesn't look like the last one. Fewer platforms everybody shares. More separate, walled-off versions of the same technology, built by whoever got cut off first and refused to just accept that as the ending. Apple built the best phone business on Earth, assuming Google, American chip makers, and Apple itself would always be the only ones capable of running a platform at this scale. Huawei just spent 5 years, quietly and without much applause, proving that assumption wrong. So next time your iPhone costs a little more than it used to, or Apple suddenly seems very interested in competing on price, there's a decent chance this is part of why. Somewhere in China, someone just bought a phone with none of Apple's fingerprints on it. And that phone is costing Apple more than anyone in Cupertino is willing to say out loud. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.